We'll see some of the people here on Zoom, but other people on Facebook, we won't be able to tell.
Okay, gotcha.
And hey, we're on Facebook. So I'm gonna get us started. So I'm gonna share my screen. Should have done this before. One moment. And one last thing. Okay. Welcome to the Searchlight series from Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia. This is our now again monthly speaker series where we meet people talking about issues that are important to the mission of Eastern State Penitentiary. Eastern State is for those who don't know it, is a prison, now a prison museum in Philadelphia. It has its own troubling and fascinating history, known primarily for its use of solitary confinement and its radial plan, this wagon wheel floor plan that was very influential in the design of prisons all over the world. Today we give tours when there's not a pandemic. We give truly thousands of tours to adults and children alike, talking about this building's legacy and the justice system today. We host art installations. This is Michelle Handelman's piece called Beware the Lily Law, about the experiences of trans people in the prison system today. That's another video installation like our guest Dehanza tonight. This is our mass incarceration graph that shows the truly staggering increase in the number of people that the United States puts in prison. You'll see we have the highest rate of incarceration in the world. And the north side of that graph shows the truly shameful racial disparities in our prison population when Eastern State Penitentiary closed in 1971 are actually growing worse in this era of mass incarceration. All these things will be open when people come back to the site. Our companion exhibit is called Prisons Today, Questions in the Age of Mass Incarceration. Our last big project was called Hidden Lives Illuminated. We taught filmmaking, animation, inside of 2 correctional facilities. And the filmmakers in those classes made 2-minute animated films about their lives, which we then projected onto the front wall of Eastern State Penitentiary for a month last summer. It was amazing. We are proud second chance employers. We're always seeking out the voices of people who've been incarcerated, who can join us on our education team and help our visitors get a perspective on American incarceration from people who've actually experienced it. Like every museum in America, pretty much we closed to the public in March. We're planning to reopen in August, but as of now, all of our programming has gone virtual. We have a twice a week 3-minute news roundup called Prisons and the Pandemic. The impact of COVID-19 on people who are incarcerated in this country has been truly disastrous. And so twice a week, you can get the big stories on that subject. We have a Hidden Histories Twitter takeover every Wednesday. This week's topic is Asian people incarcerated at Eastern State Penitentiary. That's Wednesdays at noon on Twitter. We are re-releasing those Hidden Lives Illuminated films, 1 per week with a new introduction by one of the people who helped make the films. All of our programming can be found in all the typical places: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, on our website. The Searchlight series used to be a live presentation in front of an audience. With COVID-19 closing the site, we went to a virtual experience and we went weekly. And the first 11 of our weekly Searchlight series all dealt with some aspect of COVID-19's impact on people who are incarcerated in the United States. Tonight's discussion with Day is actually the first of our Searchlight series not talking about COVID. That said, it is still the subject, we think, for people who study justice in the United States, or at least incarceration in the United States. This is the graph as of June 29th. The red line is a rate of infections. If you've watched any of our Searchlights, you know that the reporting out of prisons is typically pretty bad and the testing is pretty bad. So that 54,000 infections is probably dramatically underreported. 616 people have died, incarcerated people have died since March. So that is something, if you're interested in this topic, I encourage you to tune into our podcast twice a week, Prisons and the Pandemic. Next month on Searchlight, on August 4th, we're going to go a little bit different, and we're going to have a memorial for our beloved former coworker, Thomas Ream Cotton. Ream began his relationship with the Eastern State Penitentiary as an advisor. He and a group of other men advised us on many projects while Ream was incarcerated. When he came home, we hired him as soon as we could. Within a couple of months, he was on our education team. And Ream died of COVID-19 in April. And his story has strange and disturbing echoes for the way COVID is impacting this country. And he's dearly missed. And so 1 month from tonight, August 4th, we'll spend an hour talking about the life of Thomas Ream Cotton and all of his professional accomplishments are really something. Tonight on Searchlight, we have a great friend of the project, Dehanza Rogers. I'm going to read a quick introduction here and then get us started. Dehanza goes by Day. We'll be discussing her work as a narrative filmmaker, documenting how Black Americans navigate law enforcement and the justice system. We'll discuss clips from her film, #BlackGirlhood. It's about policing and authority in the classroom, which was commissioned in part by us, Eastern State Penitentiary, and it's been on view in Cell Block 8 since May of 2019. Our talk will touch on the recent killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and other Black Americans. Day is a filmmaker and assistant professor of film at Emory University. So Dehanza, Day, welcome to Searchlight.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I'm excited to have a conversation about things.
Oh, me too. It's such a really difficult time in our country, but there are also some really promising conversations happening. We wanted to warn the audience. Day and I discussed this afternoon how to phrase this warning. Your film and much of your work talks about violence and depicts violence against Black girls, and there's implied sexual violence in one of the clips we're going to see tonight. So that's a quick warning. If anyone in the audience wants to ask a question or reflect on Day's work, if you're on Facebook, you can put it in the comments. If you're on Zoom, there's a Q&A function at the bottom. Please send in your questions and I'll read them out as much as we can. And we will be showing clips from the film. But I wanted to start by asking you a little bit about why you wanted to work at Eastern State Penitentiary in the first place. And I've got a film here. Maybe I can show the clip of what your piece looks like. And while it doesn't have any sound, none to speak of, and while I'm showing that clip, maybe you can tell us a little bit about why Eastern State appealed to you as a location for your film. So here is what, here's what the piece looks like. It will not let me share this video. Are you seeing the video?
Oh, no. I see a video.
You are, great.
Yeah.
Good. So please tell us why Eastern State?
Okay, so I found out about Eastern State through, I think, someone in the architecture department at Cornell University while I was a professor there. And instantly I was drawn to it, as well as the art pieces that are there. I thought they were really interesting and very provocative, on top of creative, how they used the space and what they were talking about. At the time, I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to work on, but I knew it had something to do with girlhood. And then I started reading different books about girlhood and policing. And then the viral videos started, showing up online. And I thought, what is the story here about Black girls and policing and the criminalization of Black girls, right? So I read this book by Dr. Monique Morris called Push Out, the Criminalization of Black Girls in Schools. And I was just blown away with the detail of the research, right? The work that she had done and the conversations she had with the girls. It's also a documentary that's now on PBS. So do a Google search for Push Out and PBS, and I'm sure you'll be able to find it. And it talks about, these issues that girls are going through, be it, the school to prison pipeline or the sexual abuse to prison pipeline. And that really, it really pulled me in. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what kind of story I wanted to tell. Initially, it was going to be one film, and it was going to be about one girl's, experience in a school. And then I thought there are so many different types of experience having. And so I chopped it up into 3 vignettes and 3 different situations that Black girls have gone through. If you look at the news, there's so many different things about being expelled because of the type of hair they have. Like the natural Blackness that they own is an infraction, right? It's something that has to be policed, and they have to be, expelled or suspended because of it. And I thought that was really, shameful and interesting. And then I thought about, what does it look like to be a Black girl in the classroom and to have authority assert itself on you, and an unwarranted amount of aggression and authority placed on you? And then what does it look like to to have some kind of sexual relationship with someone that you shouldn't have with that person. And then what does it look like if you end up in some kind of, in the system, in the justice system. So I taught a class called Viewing Black Girlhood when I taught at Cornell. And it's about Black girls as protagonists in television shows and films. And the class was filled with young Black women. And it was 12 young Black women. And they all shared their experiences in middle school and high school. And all of them had a story, either personally or someone they knew, that had a sexual relationship with either a resource officer at the school or a teacher or coach at the school. And I thought that was really, and I, growing up as well, I remember my grandmother calling me and telling me my band teacher was arrested because of child pornography. And come to find out, he had been having relationships with students the entire time he's been a teacher there, which is, and is a predominantly Black school. And you're worried about what's happening to Black girls in schools. So I thought, this is one of the stories that I want to tell. How does this happen? And it's not even, a completely overt story. It's not about a young girl like Santonia Brown, who was forced into prostitution when she was 16 and then trafficked, right? It's not even an extreme story. It's what happens when a young girl is involved with a teacher. It's that simple. Like, what is this situation that happens with Black girls that seems to be something that I won't say acceptable outside of the school, but it's a known secret that it happens in schools. So that's why I wanted to tell that story. And then the story of the girls.
The phrase that you used earlier in this conversation and that appears on your signage at Eastern State is the sexual abuse to prison pipeline. Mm-hmm. Can you just say a few more words about that as you understand how you read that phrase and just say a few more words about that if you would?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember exactly who put out I want to say it was the Georgetown Law Review put out. I
learned it from you, actually. That's the first time I ever heard it was from you.
I found it from them, and it was a report they put out, a study about girls and sexual abuse and how that leads to the prison system. So an example would be a girl who is trafficked, and from that she is arrested for prostitution. Children aren't prostitutes, but that's a whole different conversation. She's arrested for prostitution. She's then put into the juvenile justice system, right? She's put into the system as not a victim or a survivor of sexual abuse, but as a perpetrator of a crime. And while she's in this system, she again can be sexually assaulted by those within the system. And then there's a lot of trauma and violence that the system is not ready to deal with. They're not ready to help these girls figure out the situation that they're in. And that's the sexual abuse to prison pipeline. It starts with something happening in their personal lives, be it, again, Santonia Brown being a great example of being forced into sex trafficking, and then being arrested because she killed a man who she thought was going to kill her when he came to solicit sex. And then she ends up in the prison system. And if not for a lot of public figures and advocating for her, she would still be in prison today, because for some reason you're seen as a perpetrator of a crime instead of the victim or survivor of sexual assault.
Thank you. It's really, I'm sorry to cut you off, Day.
No, it's all right. I wanted to show, I'm not going to show a clip from the beginning of the film, but I wanted to show a clip from the sexual abuse of prison pipeline, since we're talking about that. So I'll show that clip and we can have a further. I am not able to share.
Okay. Our best laid plans. Let's see here. Let's see if I can see. Maybe.
Oh, now I'm able to share.
Okay, great.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. This is a clip from the second vignette of the film. Oh, you know what? I didn't do the sound thing. Hold on. Sound. Yeah, there we go. And quick time. Okay, so here we go.
You know she didn't get that money from working. What little boy she get that money from?
From what I hear, it ain't no little boy.
What's that supposed to mean?
It means she messing with men twice her age.
Don't you mean men twice her age are messing with her? She's a child.
Men like fast-ass girls, and that's all I'm gonna say.
Oh, that was funny.
Yeah, you struggled.
A little bit. Oh. I like this hair.
You should. You paid for it. You know I could use a new fit to go with this hair.
Oh, yeah? That's a bet. So what you doing this weekend?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Well, I got some boys coming to town. Why don't you grab all your girls together and we can all hang out?
What do you mean?
You know what I mean. Come on, it'll be fun. I'll make it worth your while.
What do you mean?
I mean, they're a bunch of high rollers. They got money to burn.
Go.
Yeah, so you said you wanted to try out for track, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a clip from the second vignette from the film #BlackGirlhood.
Show me your hand!
Oh, sorry.
Right behind your back.
That's the next clip I'll show. So if you have any questions about that clip,
Well, can you tell us more about how you wrote the scene and what you were trying to get across? I think the character of the coach is so interesting. It's an echo of what you were saying earlier about, I guess, the experience you had in your school.
right?
And you wrote the film as well as film. This is your script as well.
Right. Yes.
So,
It's about a nuanced situation, right? It's complex. It's about, it's not the overt evil guy that's running around pimping girls. It's about that insidious nature of what seems to be a normal guy, right? He seems to be a coach that the kids look up to, that he's just a normal guy who works at a school. But that normal guy is really a predator, right? How is he dealing with the girls in the school? And I really wanted to that it's like racism, right? It's not always overt. It's not always the KKK. It's also microaggressions that add up. It's also the way you talk to people. It's also the fact that I can't get a loan because of my credit score, or I can't do this, or I can't do that. All those things add up. And that's what this is. It's that sense of, you think it's normal, and then there's a little thing in there that seems a little off. And then you realize that it's definitely a little bit more insidious than you thought it was.
the stories, since we're not watching the entire film, by the way, how long is the film? It's about 14 minutes, I think.
I think so, the entire film, yeah.
The stories tend to end in an open-ended way.
Yes.
And you and I were talking this afternoon about how that's intentional. So in this case with the coach, it is a nuanced situation, although it's obviously disturbing as an adult to watch that scene. But it ends and you kind of don't know what you can imagine going several different directions. And I wonder, do you know what direction is there an ending to that story that you had in mind, but you want the audience to decide for themselves? Or is it truly that you want the audience to try to fill in the blanks?
There was a moment where I want the audience to fill in the blanks. I do know where it goes after this. I am debating whether or not to add that. To the conclusion that these are essentially three different stories. So is that story of Justice by herself a full narrative? In my mind, I know it continues on, and we see what he had in mind for her in terms of his friends who have money to burn, right? Like, what does that look like for this girl who is following this man into a situation that she's not too sure of, but she's willing to do? And I want the audience to be disgusted, as well as a little, they're concerned for her, as well as what's going to happen next, and then start thinking of their own scenarios of what could potentially happen to these girls, right? That's the whole point. For me, my whole objective is, I want you to think about the narrative of the person sitting next to you that you may not have even looked at. Like, I want you to start thinking about, I used to think I want my films people's minds. And then I realized, well, if my film changes your mind, you can watch a film 10 minutes later and that film can change your mind. What I want you to do is think what I want you to walk away from is, what is this narrative that I just watched? Does anyone else share this narrative? I wonder what this person next to me, what their narrative is. Maybe I should strike up a conversation and get that story. Or what's my story? Like, how do I share my story with the world? So that's the goal for the open-ended parts of the story, where you walk away and you think, man, I should go to the internet and see what's happening. Sexual abuse in prison pipeline. What's that? What's going on? So I want you to think about the narratives that could potentially happen.
You sound just like the people, our educators and as we talked about programming in museums, that when it is successful, it's not about telling people what to think, or it's about a set of questions. It's less about, this is the message that we want the audience to receive, but these are the kind of questions that we want people to be discussing. So that must have come through when you sent in your proposal for Eastern State. That must have been what we were thinking. So promising about your work. You know, and later in that scene, the part that's, you know, the part that you showed is so upsetting, because it really, I mean, it's just hard to watch. Later, a student about Justice's own age comes in, and that's also really awful, because you see, she kind of lights up when he walks in the room, and then you see that she's being forced to choose, literally, that, you know, for that weekend, she clearly wants to go hang out with the kid her own age, and then you can see that she's being forced into this dilemma. Were you thinking about those two characters, the coach and the kid her age, as being sort of like this fork in the road moment?
Yes.
I hadn't thought about this until this very second, but it does seem like she's sitting there and she's looking at them both. And you can tell her face that she genuinely likes the kid her own age, but there's this appeal of the money and the I don't know what else it is, but the appeal of the older man, his authority.
And it is very much the choice she makes, right? She's been manipulated by the coach. And there are some nuances in the performances that I really appreciate that the actors gave me. There's a moment where the boy her age recognizes that something is off, that something between the coach and her is off. And you see it, he plays that really well, and you see his concern, but you also see that he understands that there's nothing he can do, or at least he thinks there's nothing he can do. So there is that moment where she's making a choice, but again, that choice is, she's manipulated. So it's not, and she's a teenager, right? So it's not necessarily a grown woman making an informed choice. It's a young woman, a young girl who is manipulated by an older man, and she thinks she's in love. She thinks she's being taken care of. So she's making choices based off of that. And we see this conflict within her, and we're supposed to think, I'm hoping you think that she's making choices based off this manipulation.
Hey, before we go to another clip, I wanted to ask you something. This afternoon when you and I were talking, you told me something that if you told me this before, I forgot it, which is so crazy. One of the things I absolutely love about your installation is the chairs that you chose.
Oh yeah,
And when you mailed these chairs to the office, the piece was already up and running, but it wasn't officially up. But you had the piece running before the opening for a couple of days. And these chairs showed up, and you told me, I got these great chairs, and I said, oh, okay, great. And I opened them, and as I said to you this afternoon, it was like the memory butterflies. We pulled those chairs out of the box, and it was just like going back to 8th grade. We've all sat on those chairs. Can you share with us the story behind these chairs, though, that I apparently forgot? But it's so interesting to me, aside from being really evocative.
Right. Eastern State Penitentiary is a penitentiary. And I thought about, I know that penitentiaries, they make things, right? The stereotypical idea is that they make license plates, right? That's where license plates come from. And I started doing some research, and I knew I wanted these chairs because they were, burned in my memory about middle school. I know these chairs, right? In the cafeteria as well as in the classroom. And I started doing research, and I found them at this place called Corecraft Industries. And I thought, oh, okay, this is, you buy them in bulk or whatever. And then I went to About Us, and Corecraft Industries is the front name, I shouldn't say front name, the public facing name for the New York State Penitentiary Industries. So each state penitentiary in New York has a specialized thing that they make. There's one penitentiary that makes steel products. There's another penitentiary that just does dormitory beds and furniture for dorms. And then there's another one that makes these chairs and other laminate furniture. And I thought, oh my goodness, there's this penitentiary that makes these chairs that I can put into this penitentiary about this story about Black girls who are criminalized. And there was just all these layers that, just connected for me. And I thought I was really, smart and creative. So I thought, I thought these chairs are what we're going to put in there. And also they only sell to government agencies, nonprofits, and colleges and universities. They cannot sell to any private companies because then they would be in competition with private industry. Capitalism is wonderful. It's really not. We need to dismantle it. But this is what we have, putting work, penitentiary, people in the penitentiary to work. And I'm sure there's a nice bit of profit that comes from this.
Here in Pennsylvania, that version in Pennsylvania is called Big House Industries, of all the tasteless names. And it's very common that the legislature won't let the prisons compete with private industry. Mm-hmm. So they make things like license plates that aren't made by private industry. But then, of course, there's this other layer where private industry can come in and employ people who are incarcerated. Right. I think that is so fascinating that you found those chairs and that they're actually made inside of a prison. Yeah. So when we're back with visitors at Eastern State, we got to find a way of talking about that with our visitors. It's so interesting. Dave, do you want to show another clip?
Sure. I will.
We have 3 total. So.
Well, I have 2. I decided to do 2. This is our last one. This is the last vignette. Okay, there we go.
Show me your hand!
No! Get off!
Hands behind your back!
Get off me! Get off!
Come on!
Get off! Move!
You can't just throw her around like that.
Get off!
You?
Don't touch me. Don't. Carol, are you okay? Carol, are you just gonna let him do this to us?
Go!
Do you see what's happening in your own classroom?
Let her go!
Do something.
Touch me!
What happened?
What happened?
Failed the attitude test.
You couldn't have pulled her aside and checked in on why she falling asleep in class?
She wanted to be a smartass, and I don't have time for that.
You make time, Mr. Abernathy. We're teachers. That's what we do. Because you can't talk a 15-year-old girl down, you call in a resource officer, and it escalates to 2 girls getting arrested?
If those girls would have did what they were told, they wouldn't be in the trouble that they're in.
And you don't even care. Thank you for protecting us, brother.
And that's the clip.
Can you tell us more about Mr. Abernathy?
Yeah, so
the teacher in the classroom.
All the viral videos that I've seen of Black girls being attacked by resource officers, there is always an adult in the room or near them, and they do nothing. Nothing. And it astounds me that there is an adult, and it's usually a man who's watching another man attack a girl. And it's troubling, right? And I wanted to make sure that came across, that he had a choice to make. His first choice was, do I call a resource officer in to deal with a behavioral issue? Not an issue of violence in the classroom, but a behavioral issue. This is not something for a police officer to come into the classroom. So I have a lot of friends who are teachers, and I asked, a couple of them, what would you do if you had a student who was being belligerent, who wouldn't leave the classroom? And one teacher, most of them came through UCLA's teacher education program, which is really steeped in social justice, how you deal with the student and thinking about social justice, the communities where these students come from, how do you make the world better for them so they can make the world better? And he said, if it was an extreme situation, he would call another teacher in, have that teacher take the rest of his students out of the class into her classroom, and he would sit down with the student and figure out what the situation was. There is something happening outside the classroom that is making this student lash out. What is it? So I wanted to show the complete opposite of that. What happens when you take the easy route and say, I'm just going to bring someone else in to exert power against this girl. And resource officers are a common thing. They started around the 50s. I believe it was in California, and it was about making the reputation and the community think of the police officers in a positive view, right? And then we have Columbine, and that's when it really ramped up in terms of, well, we need police officers in schools to stop school shootings. And to this date, there's not been a police officer who has stopped a school shooting. So there have been coaches who have stopped a kid from, committing a shooting, but from what I've read, there hasn't been one resource officer who has done that. So you have all these police officers in schools who aren't doing that. And then what they are doing is brutalizing Black and brown kids. And they are criminalizing those kids in the schools. So you have this guy who's in the classroom and he feels like his masculinity is being threatened. So there was a study done where they talked about police officers in the uniform and how they feel that they are the final authority. If that authority is being challenged, that means their masculinity is being challenged. If their masculinity is being challenged, they are more aggressive. They escalate a situation rather than de-escalate a situation. And that's what you see in the classroom a lot of times. You see things that don't warrant the type of violence, just like you see people in the street who are killed by the police officers that don't, what has he done that deserves death, right? So you see the exact same thing in the classroom with the amount of violence that you see against kids. It doesn't equate to what they've done.
Hmm. And so that play is also the gender, the man being talked back to by this young Black girl. That's right. Also part of the dynamic as you see it, is that it's a challenge, not just to his race. And in this scene with the particular casting that you did for that piece, I'm guessing a sense of white superiority, white supremacy that resource officer may or may not realize is even rattling around the back of his head, but it's the race, but also the gender.
Right. And the teacher being a Black male, I always say, and a lot of people say, right, white supremacy would exist if white people disappeared today. White supremacy is ingrained in our systems, how we see ourselves, how we see each other. I have some things that I believe about the world are steeped in white supremacy. I may not overtly, know it, but I know there's something in the way that I see the world is based on that. And I think everyone has that, right? Even if white people disappeared today, we will still have a situation of white supremacy existing. If men disappeared today, patriarchy would still exist, right? So it's not a question of, this Black man not seeing this Black girl just because she's Black. It's a question of he has bought into white supremacy and racism in a way, right? He's bought into the fact that authority, a white male coming into the classroom, is completely acceptable. Whatever violence he enacts upon this Black girl is acceptable. I saw a viral video of an 11-year-old girl who was attacked by a white resource officer. And there was a white teacher standing there at the door, just white, because she didn't want to, I think he wanted her to come back inside and she didn't want to. And he tackled her, an 11-year-old girl, and the teacher stood there and watched.
That's so upsetting.
You think that it's not, I think the reality of these viral videos makes people open their eyes. Everyone has said it recently. Everyone has a story about some person in their life who has been shot or killed by a police officer or knows someone. And this is the Black community. And they'll say, well, he didn't do anything. He was just shot by the police. But no, the police would never do that. Now we're seeing actual footage that says, this is common. This is a lot more common than you think it is. Imagine all the things that we're not seeing. That's the real question. That we see, unfortunately, we see George Floyd being murdered. But what about the other people? Tony McDade was killed 2 days after George Floyd. He's a trans man. And that's a whole different conversation to have. But there was no video of the situation. And it's very vague what happened. And, the police report is vague. The Breonna Taylor police report, I think, was more or less empty. It was just an empty document. So we don't know what happened because there's no video. So there's that conversation to be had about, well, what's happening in these schools that we don't see? Right. What's happening to these Black and brown students that, behind closed doors, behind classroom doors. Minneapolis was the first of a few schools who have terminated their contract with police officers or police departments since the George Floyd murder. And now it's kind of picking up a lot of steam in terms of we need to get police officers out of the classroom because it's
so
not
crazy.
Yeah,
It's
it's
so
not
crazy
really
they were there in
helping.
the first place. And then we call them resource officers.
Right.
I mean, you hear the phrase resource officer. What do you think? You think that they're gonna, sounds like a librarian, you know?
Right. And then initially they were meant to mentor. That was the mandate of a resource officer, to mentor as well as create classes around policing and civics and things like that. They don't do any of that. I've been in schools like in Los Angeles Unified School District. They're not doing that. They're sitting, you know, in their police car, a marked police car in front of the school. They're walking around the campus, but they're not teaching classes. They're not mentoring students. They're meant to de-escalate situations. They're not doing that.
You know what a friend of mine said recently, although she might have been quoting somebody else. She said, school's where you first learn what society thinks of you.
Exactly.
And so when you're coming to your school and there's a police car sitting right in front, a marked car, I mean, that's where you first get your sense of what society thinks of you.
Yeah, I spent some time in those schools doing filmmaking workshops, and I heard from other teachers as well as a few students that they would have county food. And I didn't understand what county food was. And one of my friends explained to me, county food is the same food they would give the prisoners in the penitentiary. And then the kids would say, oh, we're gonna end up there anyway, so they're giving us the same food.
Yeah.
So that's, you know, that's just a small thing. And I think from what I remember, the same bricks that were used for the school are used for the penitentiary. I don't know. I feel like that's something someone told me. I'm going to caveat that and say, maybe I'm making that up. I'm not making it up, but I feel like that was in a conversation I had with somebody.
You know, there's this thing in historic sites of like stories that may or may not be true, but should be true.
Right.
And we are told very often that prison systems plan the number of beds they need based on the grades of the third graders, and it's a story you hear again and again. And I've never seen any evidence that it's true. And what I've seen of the planning for prisons in general, it seems like they have difficulty planning 6 months out as opposed to, you know, a generation out.
Right.
And yet there's something about it that if it's not literally true, there's a truth to it anyway. You know what I mean?
Because the institution is so corrupt and so problematic that it seems like it's something that they would do.
Well, it just seems that it's a natural progression from a complete failure of the institution at one level, and it feeds down the line.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm saying anything people don't know, you know, but it's just interesting to see that's the way that it comes out.
Right.
Jay, I know this isn't your specialty, but I'm curious if you can think of a way that people could help influence, if people are troubled by what they see in your film and by the conversations that we're having. Can you think of ways that people could help influence policy or influence institutions like our schools and the choices that they're making?
Right. So, I mean, everyone says vote. And the thing is, Minnesota is a Democrat state, right? Minneapolis is a Democratic city, and it still is shitty with policing, right? So voting is not enough. Yes, vote. Of course, we need to vote, but we also need to figure out how to talk to the powers that be about changing things. So right now, what we have is, I like to say it's not progress so much as pressure. The only reason things are changing is because you have people in the streets right now that are forcing change because they are saying that it has to change. Minneapolis is making changes because literally a precinct was on fire. The city was on fire. That is what forced them to make a change, not because it's the right thing to do. So pressuring them is one way to make things change. Holding people accountable. You have companies that are putting out all these different statements, which are performative, right? They don't really mean anything. When you start talking about, because capitalism, when you start talking with your dollar and saying, well, you need to make structural changes within your organization, we're not going to buy your product until we see that, then change will happen. Then change can happen at a city level when it comes down to people going to actual city council meetings. I've seen some wonderful absolutely wonderful viral videos of people bringing city council members to task. Just really as something I read, introducing them to themselves, telling them what they need to know about what they're doing wrong. It starts at a city level. I think it starts at us having a conversation with these people and telling them, if you're not going to do the job, we're going to get you out of the job and put someone in who will do the job. As a filmmaker, part of my responsibility is showing the film to different communities, but also to people who can make decisions, who do have jobs in policy, right? In universities where people do research of this kind, who do talk to people who make policy. So I think it's multi-pronged, right? You have all these different things you can do as individuals or citizens in your city, state, and in your country. We're at a really problematic, horrible, stressful time. We have a president who is running on a ticket of racism, of dividing this country along lines of race. And that's something that we haven't seen on a national level at a very overt level for a very long time. And that does require us to put in a lot of footwork, right? It requires us to be on the streets, changing things. It's not enough to just say, I'm gonna vote in November. Yeah, we're all gonna vote in November, but we need to do a lot more than that.
Thank you. We have some questions from the audience.
Okay.
Before we get to that, I'm going to give you one more of mine and then and see what our audience has for you. What's your next project?
Oh, I've been.
This afternoon you were showing me the photographs behind you on the wall. But you said you'd tell me tonight, so now I'm curious. What are you working on?
It's called I Got Next, and it's about, at first it was a little Black boy, but I think it's gonna be a little Black girl, around 10 or 13 years old, who is afraid to go outside because of the violence that is happening to Black people by the police. So we are in a time where, yes, rightfully we should be talking about George Floyd, absolutely. But we also are leaving Black women and girls out of this conversation, where Breonna Taylor is something of an exception, but also something of an example. So an exception is that we do hear her name at times, right? But she's an example of what happens with Black women and Black girls being left out of the conversation on a level that George Floyd is in the conversation. And this isn't to say one person's murder over the other is more important. It's to say that we should be lifting up all these names, right? We should be lifting up these women and girls as much as we lift up boys and men. I can tell you, I can rattle off, unfortunately, a list of names of boys and men who have been killed by police. I would be hard pressed to come up with a list of women and girls. You know, Sandra Bland is the one I think everyone knows, but there's a 7-year-old girl, Ayanna Jones, who was shot in the head by a police officer in Detroit. When? We don't talk about her because, no one, I only know of her maybe a couple of years ago. This was 10 years ago that this happened. So we're leaving those people out of the conversation, and we're leaving LGBTQ people out of the conversation. Tony McDade, that was killed 2 days after George Floyd. Trans man, no one cares because he was a trans man. You know, so there's this conversation that we're not having about everyone and lifting everyone up to say their lives mattered, and we need to have a conversation about that and how they're being over-policed and criminalized.
Well, thank you for that.
Sure.
I think we have a slightly new system tonight. So ordinarily we have Q&A in the bottom, but I think that Nicole from our communications team is going to patch in one of our viewers. So Nicole, if you're out there, I think, so Nancy, you're up. You have a question for Dave Rogers. Looks like you're muted, Nancy. I'm going to unmute you. I cannot do that. Nancy, there you go.
Yeah, I actually didn't, but I'm thrilled that I have the opportunity to ask your guest. Are your actors in the film, I had the privilege of seeing it at the penitentiary, are they, professional actors?
Yes.
They are.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Very well done.
Thank you.
Really well done. I actually had a chance to meet you, and it was a real privilege. So thank you.
Oh.
This really illuminates the films for me much more.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy. How do you cast your films, Day?
Like most filmmakers, you put out a casting call on different websites, different companies that have like casting backstage and things like that. Or you know an actor that you've been working with. The teacher at the end, I've known her for quite some time, and she's worked on other projects with me. The hairdresser I've been wanting to work with for a while. She's an actor as well as a filmmaker. So you just, you see other people in their work and you think, I want to work with them. And then there's the, basic casting call, and you do a callback, and you have people like do the chemistry callback where you have two people interact with each other and whether or not these two actors would do well in their characters.
We were talking before we went on air tonight about the impact of COVID on my work as a museum, me and my coworkers. With the storage side work, it's very heartbreaking not to have visitors in live spaces, although this is also really wonderful. And it must be frustrating for you to think about trying to make your next film, but being stuck there in your studio. Do you have plans for what happens?
I was supposed to shoot that movie in March, and that didn't happen. So now I'm rethinking it and retooling it, but I'm not going to shoot this year. I feel like we're going to go through, that second wave. So sometime next year, hopefully. It depends on what's happening in the world. I don't want to get sick, and I don't definitely want to get anyone else sick. I mean, we're making movies, right? We're not saving lives, so it can definitely wait. But we are trying to tell some really interesting and meaningful stories.
I got another question here from our audience. John asks, how can one use narrative film to combat the myth of the hero cop, which is such a popular genre of entertainment? How do you get these audiences to start questioning this myth?
So part of that answer is we bring Hollywood to task, right? Because we have a lot of cop shows, and they are really cavalier on how they deal with police brutality as well as shootings. So we are trained to think of the cops in a certain way because of the media that we're watching. Also, no one asked for this, but this is how people are thinking that they can do the work. You have cops and you have the first 48. I find the first 48 very interesting because it's always like 95% Black people. It's 95% Black folk who are being murdered or committing crimes as if there is no one else doing these things. So I think it's the responsibility of the people who are creating media. A lot of people don't have the power to, or their voice isn't amplified enough to actually have a counter narrative, right? So the powers that be have the resources, and they have the access to the media, they have the access to us, therefore they use their media in a very specific way. Indie filmmakers, we're trying our best to have counter narratives, but so many people see our films, right? They may see them in festivals, they may see them in places like Eastern State, but that's where we have to make this change. I read a study once that said the reason why people were, they could buy into Obama being president was because there were a couple of movies that had Black presidents. We see that in the media, and then our minds start to think, oh, it's possible, it's totally possible, I saw it in that movie. So that's where we need to change this dialogue and how police deal with the public. There was a book written about the warrior cop, right? And how there should be a community cop. And part of that is you won't see a warrior cop if that cop lived in the same communities that they policed. You will see a different type of cop. So that's also part of where we tell our narrative, not just filmmaking, but our narrative as a community and how we see the people who police us. I hope that answered your question.
It does, yeah. And those not only, it's funny, the person who asked the question, John, talked about the hero cop. One of the really consistent themes you see in those kind of movies and television shows is the disrespect for due process. Yeah. It's like a thing. It's always like the rogue cop. He doesn't follow, he has his own rules. It's such a thing. And now we see, well, to your point earlier, now with all this cell phone videos, and now there's just so many more witnesses, or witnesses can really show us what the result is of those kind of attitudes of people who think that they live above these rules.
Mm-hmm.
That's a huge challenge to try to overcome.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you want to share with our audience today? I think that we're running a little low on time. We're running down, and we've seen the clips.
Yeah. Oh, well, I want to, if we talk about George Floyd, I wanted to mention hours before George Floyd, there was Amy Cooper in New York in the Bramble with the birdwatcher Christian Cooper.
That's right, and she was.
And it was hours apart. And I think what's important to think about is that narrative of what could have happened to Christian Cooper had, this woman uses her whiteness as a weapon. She weaponized whiteness and could have potentially had this man killed. And we go to, George Floyd, and it's a different situation. But again, we criminalize Black men for, using a counterfeit 20, or maybe being on drugs, or we use all this. Yeah, right. We use all these excuses to explain, the state-sanctioned murder, right? And I think that's something to think about when we think about girls in these schools. We use excuses on how we deal with Black girls because they are invisible to so many people.
Well, actually, sorry to we have one more question that just did pop up. In light of the resurgence of activism and broader support of Black Lives Matter movement, do you feel differently about where your films will be shown and what spaces they'll occupy? It's an excellent question.
Mm-hmm.
Related, would you have written another vignette or done something differently in your film after recent events? Two excellent questions.
Yeah. So answer to the first question, I definitely would feel like it would need to be shown in community spaces, very spaces where people, so as a filmmaker, you put your films into film festivals, and that's usually your audience, right? And then eventually ends up online. Showing your films in a community changes the perspective. It changes who has access to the film, who has access to the narratives. When I was at Eastern State, there were people who came up to me, Black women. I was not prepared for this. I felt I did not do my job as a human being as well as a filmmaker, but they came to me and told me their stories and how it triggered them. And part of me felt really proud that, yes, it's resonating with people. And another part of me felt like I didn't do what was right by these women and prepare them for what they were going to experience that would bring them back to their own experiences, because that's part of it, right? So showing the films in communities that have been traumatized is important to me, but how do you do that in a responsible way? I would like to take it into schools and show girls and boys in the schools. I would like to take it into juvenile detention centers, right? Because you have these girls who are there who, no fault of their own sometimes. And sometimes, they have committed, crimes. But I think it's important for them to see that there's a narrative about them out there that isn't skewed or makes them look like it was all their fault, right? And the other, what would I do differently? Man, I don't know. I feel like there is so much right now to try to just ingest and understand that I feel like I couldn't even think about a story. Like I'm thinking about this story with the little boy and the basketball and not wanting to leave the house. Like the fear, I think that's what I would work on during this time, is a little Black girl who's afraid to venture out into the world. As an adult, I see these things where people are being shot by, right-wing militias. I see police officers committing even more police brutality. So there's this fear of going out into the world. So I can't imagine being a child right now, being a Black child, wondering what would happen to me if I went out into the world, or what's going to happen to the people I love. So I think that would be the next vignette. If I were to do another vignette, it would be about that fear attached to the criminalization of Black people and the way Black people are treated, not just by the institutions, but by other people in our communities.
Okay, final question. This is another question from social media. Where can I see these films in full, and where do I go to support your work?
Oh, well, thank you, Anonymous. So the films will be online eventually after they do, like I said, the festival run, right? That's how indie short filmmakers kind of get work done. I don't know. I mean, at some point, maybe I'll put out a Kickstarter or a Seed and Spark about, hey, support this film. I will, you can go to my website, which is dehanza.com, which is my name, Dehanza. And at some point I'll have content up about my new project. If you know of any place to screen it, that's also some support. Let me know where you think would do a lot of good, or start or spark a conversation. I think that's really important as well. That's the way you can help support the film.
Dehanza Rogers, thank you so much for taking the time. It is such a pleasure to have you on, and thanks for trusting Eastern State to treat your work, to be a host your work. I recognize that's it was a lot of responsibility to make sure that the environment around that work was sensitive to it. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I'm totally proud that it's there. Yeah.
Okay.